All right, we're going.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's do it indeed. So I'm not entirely set up, set up yet. So I'm going to talk while I get the last preparations done here, and really I just need to set out my palette of colors. A couple updates on the website. It is continually getting better each week, and make sure you're checking in and taking a look at what's changed. This last week, we improved the profile pages. So if you click on my picture or my avatar in any of the pages on the website, you'll go to my profile page, and on that page, there are links for additional content that are not project related. So, and I have posted a few different videos there, so make sure you check those out. And besides that, just make sure you go in and make an account so you can have access to the additional content, and also get updates for projects that we're working on here. So today is the second part of this project, this still life project. Remember last week I told you that I wanted this to be not just about form or technique, but I want this to be about personal expression as well. We're always trying to develop those two things simultaneously, form and content. So content, remember, is related to what the art means. So I chose objects that had personal significance to me, and hopefully you were able to find objects that had significance to you as well for your still life. And it's not that, this is something that I tend to drone on about, it's not that choosing generic kind of stereotypical objects for a still life is bad per se, but I do think you're missing out on an opportunity to connect with your world, your surroundings, by not choosing objects, or when you don't choose objects that have personal significance. Through art, I believe you can understand yourself, you can understand the world around you better. So choosing objects in this case that have personal meaning will help you accomplish that. Okay, so let me point us over at the top camera here, and I'm going to show you some of the colors, some of the colors that I'm putting out. Here's our painting from last week. It's at a pretty basic stage. So today we're going to be blocking in the main parts of the painting. So let's take a look at the palette of colors here. And it looks like I'm still missing a couple. I'm going to point these out. Over here is burnt sienna, and I wanted to take a little time to point this out, that this burnt sienna is Golden brand, and this burnt sienna is Utrecht brand. Golden is a great paint, and I use their paint a lot. In this case, the burnt sienna, Golden's burnt sienna, isn't very good. The consistency is not very good, and the color quality is not very good. Whereas Utrecht burnt sienna, it's just richer, and the paint for some reason is smoother. With the Golden brand, it tends to get kind of this muddy consistency, whereas with the Utrecht it stays really smooth. So in this case, it makes a big difference. Even though it's the same color, it's going to actually look quite a bit different in practice. So we got burnt sienna right here. We have ultramarine blue and burnt umber, which is my black mixture. This is cerulean blue. This is cad red medium, alizarin crimson, cad yellow medium, And this is actually raw sienna, though I usually use yellow ochre. In this case, I just put raw sienna out there. It's pretty close to yellow ochre. And what I'm missing here is titanium white. And I better not open my oil paint box, which is what I just did. So let me grab some titanium white here, and I should be good to go. All right, and titanium white. I'm going to put plenty of that out there. And remember, I'm putting all of these daubs of paint out on a wet paper towel. And that will keep the paint from drying out. It really makes a big difference. I highly recommend that. You don't want it to be too wet. You dunk it in water and then give it a good squeeze. These are the paper towels that I use. They're shop towels. You can find them at a hardware store or at an auto supply store. They're much more rugged than a regular paper towel that you would use in the kitchen. So they won't start to pill off or deteriorate when they get wet. I also use those while I'm painting, so I'm gonna tear off a couple here. Put them up there. All right. So we should be ready to go here. Let me take a minute. I forgot to recognize and appreciate my good friend Rick. Hi, Rick.
Hi.
Good week.
Good week.
Good. As always, much appreciate Rick being here to keep the sanity strong and and just be moral support. So let's get to the painting. All right. So let's talk a little bit about where we're at. Last week, you'll remember, I blocked in the general shapes of the composition. This is our photo reference here. I wasn't too particular about getting getting it exactly right. I took some creative license in making some things bigger and smaller or shifting them around a little bit. And that's going to continue to happen as I develop the painting. If I wanted to be very exact in getting this exactly correct on the canvas, then you might want to think about, I would probably do some kind of transfer drawing or grid it out, or even just take a lot longer in making sure that I got the drawing accurate. In this case, it's not so important to me to be super accurate in translating that information. As long as I'm kind of in the ballpark, I'm happy. So today, the next step is to block in large areas of color to deal with large relationships. The key here is large. The principle that I want to drill into your brain is work general to specific. If we get to the details too soon, then we're going to start having to protect those details. We're going to have to work around those details to make big changes. Big changes become much more difficult the more refined and detailed you get. It's really, really important to understand that. It'll save you a lot of time and hassle. So in a lot of ways, in my opinion, this is the most difficult part of the painting. And not because it's technically difficult, but because it's difficult in our brain. It's hard to get ourselves to see beyond that surface detail, all those shiny little pieces, and if we were doing portraiture, all the little highlights on the eyes and the eyelashes, and all that stuff is so interesting to see, and that's pretty much the most interested, like the thing we're most interested in painting. So it's hard not to jump right into those details, but it's so important that we don't, to hold off on getting to those details as long as possible. So it's a psychological difficulty, I think, that this next step represents. but it's the most important. If you don't get this foundation, this is the foundation of your building. If you don't get a strong foundation, all those details aren't going to sit correctly on the surface. They're not going to feel like they're integrated into the painting. They're going to feel like they sit on the surface of the canvas rather than occupying a realistic space. So let's get into blocking. First, I want to choose a brush that is appropriately sized for the area that I'm addressing. This is part of the way that we resist or put off getting into details. We don't allow ourselves to do it by choosing a large brush. So in this case, my biggest shapes, remember the principle is big to small. My biggest shapes that I'm going to be addressing, well, to begin with, is this negative shape, this area around the dress and the lemons. So I'll choose a brush that I think is the biggest I would want to be able to address that area. I can't tell you how many times I've seen students try to paint a huge area like that with a brush this size. And it'll literally take them hours to paint that large area when really it could have taken them a matter of minutes. It makes a big difference. Choose appropriately sized brush and you will save yourself a ton of time and also keep yourself from getting detailed too quick. So you'll see that I've done my black mixture by mixing burnt umber and ultramarine blue, and then I put a little bit of burnt sienna in there to get kind of this warm gray in there. And I want that warm gray because it will help the blue dress stand out. So I'm using my big brush, and I'm not going to worry about getting paint on the desk. I've decided to stop attempting to keep things overly clean. All right. So you can see how quickly this is happening here, and that's because I'm using a lot of paint and a big brush. Often in my beginning painting class especially, I'll go around and that is the instruction I give. More paint, bigger brush. All right. So I'm not worried or trying to be too detailed here, but I do see this kind of fold happening up here that I want to block in. So single colors and maybe simple gradations. That's kind of the focus of this stage in the painting, and trying not to get fussy with any kind of detail. All right, and then the surface of, let's see, the surface, it's kind of hard to see in the video, everything's a little bit dark, but the surface that these objects are sitting on is a bit lighter than the side of the wall. So I'm going to add a little bit of white and warm it up with the burnt sienna, and I'm going to block that in. This is a chance for me to get rid of some of that noise of the drawing that I did to block things in. Remember, I didn't get it right the first time, so I ended up having some extra lines that I didn't necessarily want to keep. So I can cover those up at this stage. And it looks like I got a lot of water in my brush. Just wasn't paying attention, I guess, because the paint's really transparent, and it shouldn't be this transparent, at least not yet. I'm going to blend that area. And if I'm using enough paint, it'll stay wet long enough for me to blend, which is a huge problem, or one of the most difficult aspects of painting with acrylic paint is drying time. But if I use a big enough brush and enough paint, I'll have enough time to come back and smooth out brushwork and do some blending. So hopefully you can already see how having that dark background is affecting how we perceive these foreground shapes, these positive shapes. So not only is this a good logistical practice to work from dark or from big to small, to keep ourselves from getting to the detail too quickly and protecting detail too quickly, but it also helps us to see color and value relationships more accurately if we have these large areas blocked in. It creates a context for the rest of the color. All right, so now I'm going to move on to some of these smaller shapes. And because they're smaller shapes, I'm going to pick up a smaller brush. With these smaller shapes, I'm going to do essentially what I did in the background. I did kind of two values. I did this dark value for this area that folds in, and I did a lighter value. I didn't do much more definition than that. For these foreground shapes, I'm going to choose one shadow color and one highlight color. So keeping it simple. For these lemons, I'm a little worried because cad yellow, especially if it's a cheap cad yellow, can be fairly transparent. So it might take a couple layers to get the cad yellow to really pop out, or I might end up having to paint a layer of titanium white and then do the cad yellow on top of that, just so I can cover up those dark areas of the underpainting. So that looking a little bit cool, and it could be that instead of the cad yellow medium, I put out the cad yellow light or lemon yellow, which is a bit cooler. So I'm going to add a little bit of cadmium red to this cad yellow to make it a little bit more orangey. So that's my highlight color. And then for my shadow color, I'm going to add some of the burnt sienna, which is warm and it's also a darker value. And let's see what that looks like. That's actually looking pretty good, but it doesn't go dark enough for the shadow area, so I'm going to add even more burnt sienna and a little burnt umber. So burnt sienna and burnt umber are both oranges. Remember, brown is an orange. It's a dark value, typically dark value neutral orange. And we won't get into color theory here, but suffice to say that's what's important here. All right, so I'm going to call that good. Again, just trying to keep it simple gradations, and doing simple, dark, and light. I'm going to err on the side of being too dark here. I'm not going dark enough, especially for the shadow underneath. There we go. So if you don't have value contrast, remember value contrast is primarily what's responsible for making it feel three-dimensional. If you don't have enough value contrast, it's not going to feel three-dimensional. It's going to feel flat. Okay, so that's one lemon blocked in. And then I'm going to do this next lemon. And I've decided to make a bit of a change to this composition. I've decided that this foreground lemon is going to be almost entirely in shadow. And what that is going to do is it's going to kind of separate it out as from the rest of the still life setup. And I'm hoping that it's going to pull forward and frame the objects in the background a little bit better. Create a little bit more space. So you might have seen this in landscape painting or in still lifes, where the extreme foreground elements are almost kind of silhouetted in the extreme foreground. And that helps, again, with contrast, helps the other objects stand out. And be more of a focal point. Okay, so I'm going to try that. You see how this lemon right now is a lot darker than the highlight on that lemon. And I'm hoping, I might even make that darker. I'm hoping that's going to make this foreground lemon separate out, create more space, more of an extreme foreground, and allow the highlight on the lemon and on the dress to really shine and stand out. Push our attention back into the, I guess, into the midground. Okay, the dress. Let's talk about a lighter blue. I'm going to use this cerulean blue, which is kind of a cool blue. And I'm also going to put a little bit of ultramarine blue in there. It's kind of somewhere in between. It's not a warm blue exactly, but it's also not very cool either. So for the highlight area, I'm going to have this. And for the shadow area, I'm going to lean a little bit more on the ultramarine blue. So here's a prime example. On this dress, I've got all these folds. I've got this nice little texture that runs down the side of the dress here. I've got this detailing on the sleeves and on the top of the hips, and then I've got that heart right in the middle. And that heart, you'll remember, is part of the reason I chose the dress. I kind of like that little the little heart there. So the temptation would be to get to that heart because that's what I like, right? And that's exactly what I need to postpone. So it can be to your advantage to identify what it is that you are really excited to paint and then tell yourself, I can't paint that until the end. Remember, this is a psychological difficulty more than a technical difficulty. It's keeping yourself from getting to a point where you're protecting things. Because once you start protecting things, you're going to make compromises with the rest of your painting that are usually not the best. You're going to sacrifice the whole for the part, which is not a good idea. So you want to postpone that happening, and doing so will make your painting stronger. Okay, so that's my highlight color. I'm following the light logic, right? The light's coming in from top right, so I'm addressing those general areas. And then the shadow color is this darker ultramarine blue. Addressing it very generally, not letting myself get into any of those details on the sleeves, on the ornamentation on the dress. I'm just trying to get this sense of volume, the highlight and shadow. If I've used enough paint, it looks like I'm scraping it on. If you feel like you're scraping the paint on, then you're probably not using enough. But if I've used enough, I should be able to blend the highlights and shadows before it dries, which again is a little bit trickier than it might sound. Okay, so I got a little bit of a highlight and shadow starting to happen there. I could go even more contrast, darker darks, lighter lights. In fact, why don't I do that? So to make it darker, I'm going to mix the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber. It's my black mixture. And push that shadow color a little bit darker. The focus here is to get it looking three-dimensional, to get it to look like it has volume. And then, just for the sake of context, right, to get an idea of what the value extremes are. I talked a little bit about this in the first project. I'm going to put a little bit of that white, it's almost white, highlight in there. And it's not to add detail, it's again just to add a little bit of context for myself, an idea of what my lightest light is going to be. So that, and then on the sleeve, I'm going to put a little bit of that highlight. All right, so that kind of gives me an idea of what my lightest light is and what my darkest dark is. And again, I think, I know I'm going to get quite a bit darker than that. And then finally, the last little thing that I want to block in is this little red petal here. And for that, I'm going to use Cad Red, and I'm going to mix in some Cad Yellow, because this is kind of an orangey. It's a pretty soft color, actually. It's not a very saturated red. So I'm going to block that in, and I'm going to block the whole thing, because it's such a small shape here. I'm going to block it all in the same color, and then just come back with a little stroke of highlight. So this is kind of the shadow color here, and then I'm going to come back and drop in a little bit of a highlight to suggest the light logic that I've got happening here. So a little highlight right there, and then kind of comes down into the leaf. All right, so let's take a look at what we've got. It looks like I've been out of frame this whole time, goodness. All right, so I'm not going to be able to get both of these things in frame here fully. But I've got things blocked in generally. Okay, so here's my painting. I went through working from large to small. I guess I skipped this. This big lemon should have been my second shape to block in if I had been following that exactly. But I blocked in the background area, that dark area first. It's the biggest shape, biggest area to address. And then I worked my way down till I got to this little bit of red in that petal at the last. For each of these shapes, I blocked in simply a highlight and a shadow, giving myself a little bit of both of those extremes, the highlight extreme and the shadow extreme. And the reason is that's going to become the foundation, this thing that communicates volume. And all of the detail needs to sit comfortably on that sense of volume. If you get to the detail too quick and you don't have the sense of volume, then you're going to get a feeling that the detail is sitting flat on the surface of the canvas. Okay? So let's take, here's the source image. You can see all this fun detail, and I promise we're going to get to that. You can get as much detail as you want, but this is where you've got to start. Very simple, just getting that sense of volume and light logic. The one alteration that I made to the original source image is that I made this lemon in the foreground, I made that all dark, as if it's in shadow, say like a fold of fabric is preventing the light from hitting that. And I'm hoping that will kind of pull that extreme foreground forward and separate it out from the objects in the back, and it will act as kind of a framing device that will give more a sense of space. And that is going to be it for this week. I had thought that I might get to address some detail today, but I really want you to focus on this stage of the painting, the blocking in stage. The principle is working general to specific, big shapes to small shapes, and working to get a solid foundation of volume, those simple value relationships of highlights and shadows, 2 colors max per large element, per large shape in your composition. And if you really have a solid foundation in that regard, and you're getting this blocking in stage, if you get a solid foundation, then you're ready to build up those details. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. People want to jump right into folds, to little marks, to little ornamentation. If it's small, if you're using a small brush and you're moving your hand like this, that means it's a detail, right? Don't think of a detail. Detail's not any one thing. It's not. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a small mark, it's a detail. If it's a detail, postpone it as long as you possibly can. And you want to incrementally build yourself up to the point where you're ready for the details. If you don't do that, then the details are going to sit on the surface. You're going to have a flat painting. And instead of being able to paint over those details, go back down to the foundation and correctly build up the foundation, you're going to keep on noodling the details over and over and over again, and you're not going to be able to solve the problem because the problem is at this stage of the painting. So get this stage right. And that's it. So we'll catch you next week. One more week on this painting. I think it's worthwhile spending this week just focusing on getting this stage of the painting correct. Next week, what I'll probably do is pre-record like I've done in the past and just have you watch me do all the detail work in fast motion. Because really from here on out, it's pretty straightforward, just noodling, building up, burning down until you get the right balance of detail to general, more blocked in types of brushwork. So thanks again to my friend Rick for being here today, and thank you all for tuning in again. And we'll be back next week for the third and final part of this project, painting a still life. And that's it. Thanks. We'll see you all next week.